Blackbeard's third and final fruit will be acquired by the end of the Elbaf arc, and it is in fact the legendary mythical Zoan currently held by Loki. This special fruit that Loki acquired, that he believes has made him the sun god, has also tragically sealed Loki's fate to die in the end, as this fruit was in fact written and planned for Blackbeard all along. It is the mythical Zoan counterpart to Luffy's Nika fruit, an alternative, more sinister sun god fruit that completes Blackbeard's collection and solidifies him as the ultimate dark parallel to Luffy in the conflict for Pirate King and the fulfillment of the Will of D. If this sounds like too much to be true, well, strap in, because we're going to be breaking down first why Blackbeard is likely to get a third Devil Fruit, why this has long been foreshadowed to be a very specific type of mythical Zoan that is a counterpart to Luffy's Zoan, why Loki's legendary fruit is being strongly hinted to be this exact fruit, and why all signs point to both Blackbeard and Loki's storylines clearly being tied together, for Blackbeard to ultimately take the fruit from Loki at the end of the Elbaf arc. But first, we have the most beautiful travel posters we've ever made for you all this January. This month, you can get a fantastic watercolor imagining of Fishman Island, as well as Saboti Archipelago, Weatheria, and Elbaf Village from the Sun Realm. The posters are printed on matte paper, hand-cut by the artist himself, and you can get all four together for 50% off each poster. You can also still get the deluxe package if you want to appear on my streams, and in that case, you can choose any poster from 2024 as well. So if you want Fishman Island, Saboti, Weatheria, and Elbaf Village for your walls, just hit the link in the description below. All posters from 2024 will also be available in the complete original set bundle. So to begin with, Blackbeard is very likely to get a third Devil Fruit, which is most likely set to be an extremely powerful mythical Zoan. Blackbeard already has two top-tier Devil Fruits, the Logia Yami Yami no Mi and the Paramecia Gura Gura no Mi, so the only type Blackbeard is missing is a Zoan fruit to complete the set. It's likely Blackbeard will need this third and final fruit to become a fitting endgame villain, as at the moment Blackbeard still struggles with characters like Law one-on-one, and he isn't even confident fighting the 70-year-old right hand of the previous Pirate King, let alone fighting the new Pirate King in his prime. So while Blackbeard is a Yonko, it still seems as there is one final leap in growth that Blackbeard needs to make to reach his endgame strength, and so far, eating fruits has consistently been the way for Blackbeard to grow. On top of that, Blackbeard has been symbolized by 3 skulls, seemingly indicating that 3 is an important number for him and that there is a third and final ability that will make him near unstoppable. While technically this third fruit wouldn't have to be a Zoan, it most likely will be, simply as Oda tends to like doing things in 3s. 3 types of fruit, 3 types of haki, 3 ancient weapons, and so on. So Blackbeard having one of each type seems symbolically fitting. As such, we can expect an exceptionally strong mythical Zoan to turn Blackbeard into his final version of himself. However, this is unlikely to be just any strong Zoan fruit. We can expect it to have some symbolic significance. Just as Luffy has been revealed to actually be a Zoan fruit user representing the Sun God, and therefore the correct path to the dawn of the world, Blackbeard has always been the dark alternative to Luffy, the wrong path to fulfilling the Will of D that would likely plunge the world into even worse darkness rather than a new dawn. As such, Blackbeard's hypothetical, perfectly fitting Zoan fruit would be a dark contrast to the Nika fruit in some way. However, no such fruit seemed to exist to our knowledge until we entered Elbaf and met Loki. Loki very likely has an alternative to the Nika Sun God fruit. When Loki was first introduced and began claiming that he was the Sun God, that claim seemed ludicrous, as we knew that Luffy has the Sun God fruit, and therefore whatever fruit Loki has eaten cannot be the same. However, from Vegapunk's speech, we were told to broaden our horizons. The way Devil Fruits actually work is that anything that enough people imagine manifests in reality. So whereas there is only one Nika fruit, that does not mean that there is only one Sun God fruit. That would only be the case if it were established that there was only ever one concept of a Sun God, but all signs point to the Elbaf Giants believing in a different Sun God than Nika. The first sign of this is that while the Giants of Elbaf talk about the Sun God a lot, and they are also aware of Nika, it does not seem as though these two are the same deity to them. Whenever the Giants reference Nika, it's always as a god that they've heard of, but they never make it sound as though this is the predominant god to them. Rather, they speak of Nika as a fun novelty, a warrior that shows up in some of their stories, but this god is not the forefront of their culture that Elbaf was built around. In comparison, in Little Garden, Dory and Brogy continuously reference a deity that is their end-all be-all god, an extremely violent god of war that sounds as though it completely defines the culture of Elbaf. And interestingly, in the Elbaf arc so far, every time the Sun God has been referenced, it sounds like this type of god, not Nika. Loki tells us that he is the sun god that is going to destroy the world, which is nothing like the laughing, joyous Nika. Roto calls himself the sun god who rules over the world and controls everyone as he wishes. Now you might say that Loki and Roto are just outcasts of society, and so they may have a totally twisted view of what the sun god is. But the closer you look, it seems like they are not outliers. On all the Giants' ships, from Dorian Brogy to Hajrudin and the New Giant Pirates, over and over we see one specific symbol, this terrifying skull with horns and a mane. This, in fact, seems to be the defining symbol of Elbaf, and this is the very same skull that Roto adorns when he is cosplaying as the sun god. The prevalence of this skull in Elbaf culture, and the fact that Roto claims to be the sun god while wearing it, strongly suggests that this is the primary deity of Elbaf. This is the sun god that their race has believed in since ancient times. This lines up with the fact that the god that Dorian Brogy regularly referenced in Little Garden was a far more violent and destructive god than Nika, and the fact that Loki claims that as the sun god his role is to destroy the world, which does not fit Nika's legend at all. All of these signs point to the Elbaf Giants having long believed in a different sun god that matched their ancient values of war and violence. A sun god of destruction rather than a sun god of laughter and joy like Nika. And while the Giants of Elbaf are clearly still aware of Nika and they are a fan of his legends and do consider him to be one of the gods in their culture as well, it seems they consider their sun god to be a different deity entirely. This would make a lot of sense when you remember that the only race that explicitly believes Nika to be the sun god is the Buccaneers. The Shanyans talk about a sun god amongst many other gods. The Giants of Elbaf also of course believe in a sun god, but technically it's only the Buccaneers that are confirmed to explicitly name Nika as the sun god. Now what's interesting is how this applies to how devil fruits work. What we must remember here is that no actual god's existence has ever been confirmed in One Piece. There isn't necessarily a literal sun god that exists in the One Piece universe at all. The point is that all that matters is that enough people believe in a concept and then it becomes real via devil fruit. As such, there isn't really a correct vision of the sun god. Different cultures may naturally have developed different visions of a sun god that fit their values. So if we contrast the Buccaneers with the Giants of Elbaf, we can immediately see where their differing visions of the sun god may have come from. The Buccaneers seem to value the idea of freedom first and foremost. The very name of their race is synonymous with pirates, and they have a long history of being slaves. So they may have envisioned their sun god as a dancing warrior of liberation that would come free them with smiles and laughter whenever they were in need. However, the culture of Elbaf is very, very different. The Elbaf Giants have historically been mighty warriors that could not be stopped. A race who proudly placed war, violence, and bloodshed above all else. Even just looking at how the sun itself is valued in Elbaf culture, it is associated with the cycle of death and rebirth, which also fits with Loki's vision of destruction. As such, if a race such as this were to envision a sun god, then the deity that they would imagine would likely be something like this, a terrifying warrior god that could bring the death and rebirth of the world, blessing the Giants to be forever victorious in their battles and conquest, rather than the dancing warrior of salvation that the Buccaneers prayed for. Now again, the Giants of Elbaf still clearly know of Nika and love his stories, as stories from various ancient cultures would naturally have spread between cultures just as they do in the real world, and the Buccaneers in particular may have been a very close race to the Giants, but again, Nika still ultimately only seems to be a warrior that the Giants of Elbaf know of and respect, but not their primary deity. As again, the predominant symbol across all of Elbaf is that of this far more terrifying deity that is likely their version of the sun god, based on Roto's impersonation. As such, just as there is the Nika fruit, which represents the sun god according to the beliefs of certain cultures such as the Buccaneers, it's likely that the Giants' belief in their deity produced an entirely different sun god fruit, this sun god of violence and destruction. This is the legendary fruit that has been passed down through Elbaf's royal line. This is the fruit that Loki has eaten today that makes him believe he is the sun god who will destroy the world. And this is the very same fruit that the God's Knights have come to take in the Elbaf arc. The parallels to the situation with the Nika fruit are striking. Loki's fruit and the Nika fruit are the only two fruits in the history of One Piece to have ever been referred to as legendary. And these also just happen to be the only two fruits that the world government specifically has tried to acquire, out of fear of what their power represents. While it is not yet confirmed that the God's Knights are after Loki's fruit, literally the entire story of Loki revolves around the fact that he has eaten this legendary fruit, that is why he is so special, so it is far more likely than not that the God's Knights are here for the fruit, as the world government fears both sun god fruits and needs to control both sun god fruits. And so finally this brings us back to Blackbeard. So Blackbeard needs a third fruit, likely a Zoan, and really most likely a Zoan of extreme power that will also make him a symbolic counterpart to Luffy. The natural choice would be a Dark Sun God fruit that contrasts the Nika fruit, and it seems like that is exactly what we are getting in Elbaf. This fruit that Loki has eaten is the absolute perfect fruit for completing Blackbeard's trifecta, as not only would it make Blackbeard the dark parallel to Luffy's Sun God fruit, it also perfectly fits the motif of all of Blackbeard's fruits so far. Blackbeard's fruits are specifically defined by the idea of destruction, as Blackbeard himself is meant to represent the idea of destruction, tearing down the established order and plunging everything into darkness, as opposed to Luffy, who tears down the established order to bring a better future. Blackbeard's Yami Yami no Mi is of course the darkness that reduces everything to nothing, and the Gura Gura no Mi is the power to destroy everything. The natural final fruit to complete the set is the Dark Sun God fruit, which is also defined by the power to destroy the world. 3 fruits defined by destruction. Seriously, read the description of Blackbeard's previous fruits and tell me that Loki's Zoan is not clearly set up for Blackbeard. On top of this, Blackbeard's fruits all share the same pattern of each being singled out as uniquely special devil fruits, even by the standards of other devil fruits. In all of One Piece, there are many powerful fruits, but there are literally only 4 fruits in the story's history total that Oda has made clear have a special reputation. The Yami Yami no Mi is stated to be the most powerful devil fruit. The Gura Gura no Mi is stated to be the most destructive devil fruit. The Hito Hito no Mi model Nika is said to be the most ridiculous devil fruit. And finally, the Elbaf Royal Family fruit is said to be a legendary fruit. Luffy has one of these 4 special fruits, Blackbeard already has 2, and the only fruit he still has to get is a Zoan, and most likely it's going to be a Zoan with a uniquely special reputation, the same as his Logia and Paramecia, which means literally only the Elbaf Zoan fits the bill. Combine this with the fact that it seems like this Elbaf fruit is the Dark Sun God fruit to parallel Luffy's Sun God fruit, and it is all but guaranteed that this is the only Zoan worthy to complete Blackbeard's roster. Now, while I've been talking about how this fits Blackbeard the whole time, what about Loki? Well, sadly, Loki at this moment in time has been written to be pretty much exactly the type of character you would expect to have Blackbeard's final fruit, before being killed for it. To begin with, Blackbeard's final fruit was always most likely going to be in the hands of someone else before Blackbeard claimed it. This is because this is yet another defining motif of Blackbeard. Blackbeard doesn't just find devil fruits and eats them, he specifically kills characters to take their powers. He killed Thatch to take the Yami Yami no Mi, he killed his own father Whitebeard to take the Gura Gura no Mi. This is part of the darkness inherent to Blackbeard's story. The same applies to his whole crew, they all hunt devil fruit users to kill them and take their powers. So whatever final Zoan fruit Blackbeard was going to get, it was never going to be without getting more blood on his hands. A character was always going to be written to have Blackbeard's final Zoan fruit, and they were always going to have to die for Blackbeard to get it. So, considering a character was always going to have to be written with this fruit to die, Blackbeard's final Zoan was always going to be in the hands of a character that would fit 3 important criteria. First, it would need to be in the hands of a character who would logically have been hidden from us even this deep in the story despite having such a legendary and important fruit. Second, it would need to be in the hands of a character who is not a villain. And third, Oda would need to be able to kill this character without having significant ramifications for the overarching story. If you are confused about the second criteria, the character would need to not be a villain so that we don't end up with a repetitive battle of Luffy facing off against the Dark Sun God fruit twice. It would not make sense for Luffy to first fight the evil original user of the Dark Sun God fruit and then again fight Blackbeard when Blackbeard is wielding the Dark Sun God fruit, as that would largely defeat the unique symbolism of Luffy, the true Sun God, fighting Blackbeard, the Dark Sun God, in the end. So considering these are the 3 criteria, well, yeah, Loki has been written into the story as essentially born to die. To begin with, if Oda was always planning a powerful second Sun God fruit to go to Blackbeard, how would he have set that up to be introduced this late in the game? Well, to keep it hidden till endgame, Oda would have planted it in an island that is mysterious and isolated, which is basically Elbaf. Elbaf is outside of world government control, and really it's outside all of the geopolitical struggles that we've been following, of Yonko versus Marines versus revolutionaries and so on. And on top of this, the wielder of this fruit has been imprisoned in the Elbaf Island, such that despite having such a legendary power, Loki would naturally not have been heard of in the story so far. Basically, Loki is the perfectly logical way to introduce such a powerful and important fruit this late in the game. Second, Loki's fate was really sealed once it became established that Loki is likely not a bad guy. The moment we understood that Loki is in fact kind-hearted and only projects a harsh exterior, it was over for him. Because now, it's unlikely that we ever see Loki fighting Luffy in some epic final battle in Elbaf. Which means if Blackbeard takes Loki's fruit ability, it would make for a completely unique matchup for Luffy in the end game. And finally, the real problem with Loki is that he does not have a broader purpose in the overarching narrative of One Piece. While Loki is likely to be extremely important in the story of Elbaf, there doesn't really seem to be any place for him beyond that. The broader conflict of One Piece is very meticulously crafted. Over the decades, we've had an intricate web of factions and powerhouses within those factions established established between the Yonko, the Marines, the Revolutionaries, and the world government. Even major players that are still being revealed, such as the Gods Knights, were still established much earlier with a clear purpose and role in the conflict. Seemingly all the most important players and pieces were set up, and then we got to Elbaf and Loki was airdropped into the story. Yes, we'd heard of him before, of course, but we had no indication that he was this strong. But in Elbaf, it's revealed that Loki is in fact an extremely powerful warrior, and yet there are two issues that prevent him from having a clear place in the overarching story after Elbaf. To begin with, Loki has no real faction. He is not associated with anyone, and he can't be so strong that he can simply exist as a solo player in the final war, as no one is strong enough to do that. Now at first it was possible that Loki may join forces with some villain group, like say the Blackbeard Pirates. But since we've learned that Loki is in fact very kind-hearted, it no longer seems like Loki will be playing on the villain side in the future. So perhaps Loki could join forces with protagonists, however in this case he may actually be too strong. Loki is introduced as practically a force of nature, possibly even comparable to a Yonko in strength, so it's hard to imagine him just slotting into something like the Straw Hat Grand Fleet. A protagonist as powerful as Loki in the endgame would go beyond side characters like Sabo or Law. Loki would demand a large role in the story, requiring some sort of significant matchup such as a Gorosei or an Admiral. Loki essentially impacts the conflict of One Piece too much if he emerges as a protagonist, so it's hard to imagine where he fits amongst everything else that has been established. All of these factors together seem to point to Loki ultimately being a character that Blackbeard kills to progress Blackbeard's own strength as a villain in the final saga. Loki was written to be exceptionally strong precisely because it helps to establish the power of the Zoan fruit when it's wielded by a mighty warrior, but also to make for a worthy final stepping stone for Blackbeard to attain his final ability. And the final key piece to it all is the fact that the story of Loki so far seems to be a reverse of Blackbeard's. Blackbeard is an absolute genuine villain who killed his own father just to gain his fruit. However, while Loki supposedly also killed his own father to gain his fruit, what we're quickly beginning to learn is that Loki may not in fact be the villain that he is being painted out to be. What Oda is hammering in with Loki is that the reputation does not match the man. There is a kind heart in there somewhere. As such, the initial surface level parallel to Blackbeard now takes on a different slant. If Oda intentionally paralleled Loki to Blackbeard from the beginning, only to then reveal that this was a subversion of Blackbeard's storyline, then it raises the question of what Oda is doing thematically with these two characters. Are their stories destined to meet, with Loki being the tragic hero that falls to Blackbeard in Blackbeard's final step of growth? If so, we may very well be on our way towards one of the greatest character storylines in One Piece history, potentially the most moving and tragic side character arc in the entire series, and the conclusion to Blackbeard's quest for power. So if you believe this is the way that Loki's story ends, then let me know in the comments below, and if you enjoyed this video, then definitely like and subscribe. And if you want to hear why Oda is likely to kill Loki, even though Oda is normally averse to killing characters, you can listen to my weekly podcast by supporting me on Patreon, link in the description below.